And so
Yeah.
your world starts to get smaller. And that's also a physiology of depression. I say it's a physiology of disconnect. So where I love my kids, I don't feel like doing anything with them. I love painting. I'm not doing it anymore. I love my partner. I don't feel love for them. I just don't feel it. When you start saying things like that, that is cortisol winning and oxytocin is losing. And what we want to do is empower oxytocin to put it back into the winner circle, to like do the daily practices that increase oxytocin naturally in our body, because that physiology is destructive. It's a catabolic physiology. We're in this breakdown mode, and in that state, you don't restore. You age faster. You get hair loss, wrinkles, gray hair, rapid aging, and so much more. So it's that catabolic, that breakdown state where oxytocin is anabolic, builds us back up. It is that hormone of joy and connection. No matter what we've been through in our life, our purpose is to live in joy, happiness, pleasure, right? And
Hmm.
so we want to, and good relationships. And so empowering oxytocin becomes even more and more important for life.
Today's episode is such a treat. I'm sitting down with the incredible Dr. Anna Cabeca, triple board certified OB-GYN, hormone expert, and the author of the Hormone Fix, which was our April pick inside the Book Nook community. Now, listen, I don't want her credentials to intimidate you. She is a total expert in her field, but she is also one of the most relatable, down-to-earth, real women I have had the chance to talk to, and it's exactly why I brought her into our community. In this episode, we went deeper than we did together in the book. We talked about the simple things that can actually shift your hormones, from pH strips, alkaline balance, to why play and connection are essential for balancing cortisol and oxytocin, and it's way easier than you think. And if you have ever felt overwhelmed by hormone talk or unsure where to start, this conversation is going to leave you feeling empowered, inspired, and honestly relieved. It doesn't have to be so complicated. Let's dive in. Hey, real quick, have you ever felt like there's no time to rest, put your feet up, or even think about picking up a book? It's exactly why I created Best Friends Book Nook. This is not your typical book club. It's designed for busy women just like us who are wanting to connect with ourselves, grow, but without the pressure. In this free community, we choose inspiring, easy to read books and create space for ourselves, even if it's just 5 minutes a day, to breathe, reset, and finally enjoy a little me time. The best part, we have regular community connection calls where we share insights, connect, and support each other. If this sounds like what you've been craving, check the links to Book Nook in the description. We'd love to see you there. Now, back to the show. Okay, welcome, Dr. Cabeca. Thank you so much for being here for this conversation. I'm really looking forward to this.
I have been looking forward to it all week. I was like so excited because this is, a good conversation. You've been even ramping me up in your social media, and that you've been enjoying my book for book club and everything. I've been so looking forward to it, Melissa. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. What in particular, I would love to know, like what excites you about us having this conversation together? And alongside, we've got some of our private community happen in the recording studio here with us. So is it like the community aspect of women reading your book together, or, what is it about us being
Definitely.
together?
When I wrote it, I was like, okay, this is great for book clubs, for Bible groups, for home groups, for whatever, office parties. I mean, this is a good book for women to gather together and work through, talk about these things. So often we haven't had either permission or the words or the ability to have this conversation. So I like that we're talking about it. We're having this conversation. And so what the book was intended to do.
I love that. I love that. So just some background for people who are listening. Dr. Cabeca is our Book Nook author this month. And what's so beautiful, in my opinion, and why I created this community, a number of reasons, but I think so many of us busy women don't have community. We don't have access to it amidst our lives. And as you know, Dr. Cabeca, with all of your experience, and I know we're going to talk about this, how incredibly important that is, not just for our mental health, but biologically our health and balancing our hormones. So my intention with this conversation, and we can really go anywhere it takes us, is for this to feel like a communal conversation. Like we are all just, gathering here and exhaling for a minute from our busy lives, maybe grabbing a cozy spot, our favorite drink, and having this conversation together. You obviously are the expert, and we have so much to learn from you. And I think in addition to that, there's so much power in the collaborative conversation that we can all bring to the table.
Thank you. And I
Okay.
always think like this is a conversation that we should be, again, we want to propagate, we want to have, because it's likely not a conversation we have with our mothers. So if we can have it with our daughters, if we can open up this conversation about our hormones, our bodies changing shamelessly and guiltlessly with a genuine curiosity, it gives us also permission to feel empowered and to do something about it versus I think a lot in our medical community has done, okay, here, come in, I check you, here's a prescription, you leave, right? Come back next year and I'll see if I find another problem. And this is like, wait. Within our bodies, we have so much power to heal. And I think it is part of that having the intimacy of girlfriends to talk to, safe community. You're not alone. Knowing that we are not alone, and that's something I hear so often is like, oh my gosh, I was wondering, I thought this is just something I had to deal with or I'm powering through, or I thought I was going crazy. I'm like, okay, no, you're not alone, and there's
Yeah.
so much we can do.
Yeah. And I think just again, to applying that to the aspect of community, like when we live in these siloed lives where, perhaps we're surrounded by people either in our family or in our career, but like if we're not having these deeper conversations, we can be surrounded by people and yet feel extremely isolated and extremely lonely. And I love, someone like you with your experience with the thousands of patients that you've worked with and treated, that that this is very typical. Maybe it's not normal how we're feeling, but it's very typical, especially in the way that our society lives. And what really excites me about this conversation, Dr. Cabeca, is I think you really bring to the hormonal lens, one, this amazing trust in the body, which I have as well as a chiropractor, but two, like this ancestral wisdom and a way to look at it that we don't look at in our traditional medical model. And that comes from your travel around the world with your family. And so I want, for anyone who hasn't read the book, for the women in the room, you read part of Dr. Cabeca's story, as we read this book together. But for anyone who hasn't gotten to read your book yet, a little bit of like what got you to this place of writing the Hormonal Fix, and what you learned in that process.
Yeah. So, part of my own journey was being diagnosed quite devastatingly with infertility at age 39 and then early menopause at age 39. And as an OB-GYN, as I trained at one of the best institutions in the world, I had nothing in my doctor's bag. And that's it. When you get that diagnosis, oftentimes as a patient, you're like, oh, that's my destiny. And, here as a living example that your diagnosis is not your destiny. And heartbroken after that diagnosis, I took a sabbatical from my medical practice. I had a solo practice in Southeast Georgia, and I took my girls and my husband, and we traveled around the world. And for me, it was, first of all, I needed to keep the earth moving under my feet. The fight, flight, freeze. My flight was escape. My initial reaction was part of this, like this healing journey, this time to take this sabbatical to heal in privacy, right? Versus in my medical practice and my small community. And so there was part of that. And as a result of that, and learning serendipitously from indigenous healers around the world and practices, traditional healing practices, that not only was my early menopause reversed, but my infertility was reversed. And at 41, I naturally conceived the child I was told I would never be able to have. So that was like, blew my mind. And I came back into medical practice after a year away, pregnant. And I was like, okay, we're doing things differently here at Dr. Anna Cabeca. We are doing things differently here. Let's get to the underlying root cause. Let's heal the body, mind, and spirit, because we work together as a unit. And that's where I developed my hormonal restoration method. In the Hormone Fix, I say it takes more than hormones to fix our hormones,
Yeah,
and that's within us.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, so much there. I think what's really interesting is your practitioner lens and being someone who was told you can never blank. Like, I think there's so many of us women who have been told that from an authority figure. whether it's a mother, father, teacher, preacher, or whether it's a doctor, which I think is even more powerful when we hear that from someone in a white coat. And so I love that you ran with that, you didn't let that be your destiny. And I think, it can sound like this really beautiful journey from the outside, right? But I imagine there was some challenges in that whole process. And I would love for you to touch on some of that. And maybe even if there's some that you didn't really share, go really deep into in the book, because I think that's what we experience when we go on these journeys of doing it another way
Yeah.
or being the cycle breakers when we're like, this way isn't working for me anymore. It's not always going to be butterflies and rainbows. And so I think it's really important to speak to, how you keep on through those challenges and what it gets you to on the other side.
Yeah, there's a couple things. I want to share something that I don't share in the book. And first is that, one of the things I learned in my journey around the world is the Buddha saying that everywhere you go, there you are. I'm like, I traveled around the world to learn that saying. You don't have to go anywhere to really restore your human body, to heal your soul, your body. Part of my story that I do share is that we lost our son, our only son, tragically, and he was only 18 months and 3 days old. And I was still nursing him. I was breastfeeding him. And physically, what happened from that moment, from breastfeeding him, if you miss a feeding, your breast engorge. I went completely flat to empty socks. There was not another drop of milk that
Like
my
instantly.
body made instantly. And from there, early menopause. And I always reflect on that, the power, the stress physiology. That's why I talk about not so much stress management, but oxytocin production, playing, oxytocin, oxy-play, I like to call it. And there's a whole chapter in the Hormone Fix on that. And I
Loved it.
love that if I hadn't gone through what I went through, I wouldn't know this. I wouldn't know to teach this. And I think from everything I do, hormone restoration wise, that's the single most important and effective thing I teach and I give and empower others with. Second part of the journey is you can imagine after this and being, losing our child, being diagnosed with infertility, being told menopause and no chance of fertility, failing round after round of infertility treatments. I was devastated. I was very, very depressed. And I remember part of my journey, I was in Australia in Kinkin, and I've been to this little healing retreat. And part of that healing retreat after fasting was to climb this mountain in Kinkin, Australia. And I climbed this at sunrise, this mountain at sunrise. And I went to look at the view. I went close to the edge because, I wouldn't say a death wish. Well, I was very depressed and really suicidal, but I went to the edge of this cliff to look and I slipped and I started falling off the cliff. I grabbed a tree, cut open my leg, and I just heard, like I heard God speak through me, and he said, "You will survive this. You will
Mm.
survive this." And that brought me to tears because part of me didn't want to survive it, right? But then there was like, if I'm going to survive this, how am I going to live? How am I going to
Mm.
live for my children? How am I going to show them how to deal with grief and devastation and what life throws our way? And I remember that, like, I will survive this. You will survive this. That was the words that I was given. And I think that was a life and death moment that really changed my lens of awareness and a lens of self healing that needed to happen.
Yeah, definitely. Super powerful. I mean, it's like that became your North Star, right? I like to use that word North Star, like you're setting your compass, like I'm going to survive and I'm going to get through. I don't know the steps or exactly what they're going to look like to get there, but I'm now committed, right? That came through you to you. I think it's important that we touch on, obviously, first of all, most importantly, I'm so sorry for the tragic loss of your son. And I can see that he would be so proud of his mama. And I want to tear up as a mom. But for all that you're inspiring so many people through him. And that's
Thank you.
really beautiful. So thank you. Um, I want to make sure that we touch on how real stress impacts our physiology. Because you said, any woman who's ever breastfed, I mean, you miss a feeding and your boobs hurt. They are so full. And so for yours in that moment to completely stop, which is the nourishment for your son. So that's like a very dramatic switch, but it was this,
Instantaneous.
yeah.
Wow.
So it's the stress and the grief, which is obviously a very extreme version of stress. And we're not all feeling that version every day, but I do want to say physiologically, stress is processed as stress. And so,
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about even just like simplified fifth grade version of why do all other systems shut down when we are in a state of stress, whether that's healing, detoxification, hormone regulation, in your case, fertility, you got pushed into menopause. So for the woman listening, maybe it's, I can't figure out why my hormones aren't figured out. I can't figure out why I'm losing hair. I can't figure out why I'm not sleeping or I'm not digesting. How can we simply apply that and make sense of course, that would happen when we have stress?
Yeah. And, again, this is where our medical system's not aware of this full impact. And so, what understanding the physiology of that stress, that instant stress response, is that your body's pumping out cortisol. It is pumping out cortisol, and cortisol is made from progesterone. Progesterone is our reproductive hormone. It's our hormone that is secreted in our second phase of our menstrual cycle. It's produced in our reproductive years by our ovaries and by our adrenal glands. And so it is our it is the like what keeps our bucket of reserve full, progesterone, our progesterone hormone. And so downstream from progesterone is cortisol. So we make progesterone and pregnenolone from cholesterol. Cholesterol is not a bad guy. And then from progesterone, we make cortisol. So when we're like pushing the gas pedal of cortisol, we're depleting our progesterone. That can put us into infertility, irregular menstrual cycles, worsened PMS. We say estrogen dominant symptoms, which are really progesterone deficiency symptoms, such as PMS symptoms. I always tell my clients, if you only hate your partner 2 weeks out of the month, it's more likely your hormones than it is your partner. And so there's that piece. And also the brain fog, because progesterone is neuroprotective. Progesterone helps us sleep. We need it, downstream. We make from progesterone, we support tryptophan production to support serotonin, our anti-anxiety hormone, and our melatonin, our sleep hormone production. And so if we deplete that progesterone, we're getting this anxious, worsened anxiety, worsened insomnia, waking up not feeling rested, not being able to sleep through the night. Those symptoms just will create a negative energetic downward spiral. It is that depletion. It's like, okay, you've blasted a hole in your bucket. And I will say, whatever the stress is, trauma, big T, little t, everyday chronic stress, pandemic stress, I mean, all kinds of effects, whatever that perceived stress, real or perceived stress, affects our physiology in that way. And when cortisol is being pumped out, oxytocin is depleted. So oxytocin decrease, because you can't be in this fight, flight mode and let's cuddle, let's nourish, let's connect, right? It's one or the other. Yeah. And so cortisol goes up, and oxytocin, this hormone of enjoying life, of that joy, that joie de vivre, that seeing life through rose-colored glasses, that hormone depletes. So cortisol goes up and oxytocin gets suppressed. And when cortisol's up for a long time, as in the case of chronic everyday stress, chronic inflammation, because cortisol is our steroid hormone, anti-inflammatory hormone. So whether it's chronic inflammation, chronic stress, post-traumatic stress, the area in our brain called the paraventricular nucleus gives the signal like, okay, cortisol, you're frying out your system, right? You're frying me out. I'm frazzled now. Literally, people say, I feel frazzled. That's cortisol. And so your paraventricular nucleus, or PVN for short, says, okay, now I got to suppress you. It's not that the adrenals give out or are fatigued per se, but it's like, okay, we're suppressing cortisol. And this state, when you're in the low cortisol, low oxytocin state, is that feeling of disconnect, is that feeling all of a sudden your world's getting smaller, more isolated. You go, if you're out at the grocery store getting groceries, you're like, oh, I see a friend I've known for 20 years, but you're like, I'm invisible. I don't want to see them. I don't see them. They don't see me. It's that sense of, like my world's getting smaller. Or maybe I'll just order it on Instacart instead of going out. And so your world starts to get smaller. And that's also a physiology of depression. I say it's a physiology of disconnect. So where I love my kids, I don't feel like doing anything with them. I love painting. I'm not doing it anymore. I love my partner. I don't feel love for them. I just don't feel it. When you start saying things like that, that is cortisol winning and oxytocin is losing. And what we want to do is empower oxytocin to put it back into the winner circle, to like do the daily practices that increase oxytocin naturally in our body, because that physiology is destructive. It's a catabolic physiology. We're in this breakdown mode, and in that state, you don't restore. You age faster. You get hair loss, wrinkles, gray hair, rapid aging, and so much more. So it's that catabolic, that breakdown state where oxytocin is anabolic, builds us back up. It is that hormone of joy and connection. No matter what we've been through in our life, our purpose is to live in joy, happiness, pleasure, right? And so we want to, and good relationships. And so empowering oxytocin becomes even more and more important for life. And so empowering that, no matter what we've been through, no matter what we've done or not done, this is important to realize as part of our gift, the gift of being here, and probably one of the biggest lessons we learn in our lifetime. At least that's the one that I've learned, the biggest lesson I've learned in my lifetime.
Yeah, and the most fun and easy, which I'm so excited to dive right into that. I do just want to invite, the women that are in the room, part of the private community, give us a hell yes. Like, how refreshing is this information? In the age of information, we're like, okay, God, now we all know that we have control over our hormones. There's more we can do. And oftentimes it's like, okay, spend thousands of dollars on these lab tests, which I do feel are very, very important and very, very insightful. And I do them. And to hear something so refreshing as play and getting back to who we are and connection, being a tool that we can use is just, it's part of why I've loved bringing your book into our community. It's so refreshing and easy. We're juggling so much. Like, let's let it be easy and fun.
Exactly. And, I always say we put so much emphasis on stress management today, right? Like I've got to do the stress, I got to do this deep breathing. I've got to do this, I got to do all these things in order to manage my stress. And it's so stressful thinking about stress management, right?
So stressful.
So if we think, okay, what brings me pleasure? What brings a smile to my face? Where can I increase oxytocin in my life? I say oxy-play. Where can I have oxy-play in my life? Where can I play more, invite more pleasure in, invite more presence in? Because you have to be, especially with a trauma that we've experienced in our lives. And by the time you get to our age, we've had some trauma, loss of a loved one, some loss of a change in profession, whatever the situation is it's that sense of, okay, where can I have more presence? Because in the presence is healing.
I love that. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I really feel like when you talked about the symptoms of, women's worlds getting smaller or hair falling, I mean, I feel like you literally nailed a symptom that anyone listening to this, I would assume either has experienced or knows another woman in her friendship circle or family who has also experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think what's really important to highlight is that this doesn't mean that our body's not smart. I mean, our body is doing this because it's incredible. Mm-hmm. This is for our survival. So it's like, okay, there's chronic stress, there's a lot of cortisol. Survival must be threatened. So I'm going to shut down that anything that doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if you have a beautiful head of hair. If you're running from a tiger, that's not going to keep you alive, right? So these things happen because our body is smart. And now what we've got to do is talk about what Dr. Cabeca said, like, let's give it what it needs. Let's give it what's going to balance out the cortisol, because we're not running from a tiger, but our body thinks we are. And by the time we get to our age, we've all experienced some sort of trauma, which is essentially a loss of sense of control. And that happens in traffic. Like, traffic can be perceived as trauma to our body physiologically. So I want to delve deeper into this oxytocin conversation, because what you're saying is raising our oxytocin can literally help, like, lower the cortisol, right? Turn down the cortisol.
Yep. And restore physiologic homeostasis, really. And I want to explain too, because when we have, because we've dealt with the trauma, we think about it, just how quickly, especially in the case of post-traumatic stress, and it can be the case of a car accident, can be the case of a diagnosis, can be anything that creates the trauma that we've reflected on more than once, just like a seizure. And I say, like, this physiologic response is like the seizure response. In other words, I have my oldest daughter has had seizures. She started with seizures in her 20s. And when she had her first seizure, it was like, okay, maybe she won't get another seizure. But as in neurology, we know that if you have a second seizure, that pathway's set. We know you're going to have a third seizure. The same with this trauma response, like the physiologic trauma response. It's like, okay, you know that physiology is set. It's like you get into these ruts in the road, or I like to say, if you're a skier, for instance, you get that first clean white snow and put your tracks in. But if you're like the end of skiing mid-afternoon on Christmas, there are all these ruts there's all these tracks, right? And you can get caught in these tracks, and that's what's happening on a nervous system. And so what we have to learn to do through these practices that I teach in my book, The Hormone Fix, through the understanding this stress response and empowering oxytocin, we're putting a fresh new layer of snow down. We are repairing those tracks, right? We're stopping that cycle from perpetuating.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, so important. And absolutely, anyone listening, if you guys have not read this book yet, grab it. We will link it below. So easy to digest and yet so powerful. So we're going to talk about some more of the inside out tools, and then we're going to talk about some of like the objective, like measuring and pH strips and some things like that. Ladies in my community, drop any questions you have with, pH strips or any of the stuff we've been working on together as a community. But in the meantime, Dr. Cabeca, I want to kind of zoom out and get a little bit more of a view and understanding of your time when you were traveling. And did you get to spend some time looking at other communities and cultures, particularly the women in them?
Yeah, that's been
yeah, go ahead.
so fascinating to me is to see, especially in many of the traditional societies, like, how they handled stress, how they address, how they heal. And the one thing they heal in community. And part of my journey was going to Peru, and and in Peru, there's, especially I was in some of the indigenous areas of Peru that were very, very poor. They say when you're tired, drink maca, this indigenous root, and drink this maca. And if you're infertile, drink the maca. If then they're like, it's the Peruvian Viagra. So, like I'm drinking the maca there. So it was this healing food. It wasn't like, okay, there's nothing to do. There's something to do. There's always one next right step. And so it's that positivity, that hope, that sense of community and connection that made a really big difference. And seeing women, especially older women, I remember being in Lago Titicaca in Peru, and we're climbing up like hundreds of stairs, and women are climbing, with beautiful, facial lines and smile lines, laugh lines, their ages.
Like weathered, a little weathered, but so beautiful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Salt and pepper hair, white hair, and in a braid. And they have this case of water they're walking up these steps on, and they're like, they're climbing, they're resilient. Like what creates this resilience? What's bringing their smiles? And despite the hard work or the hard situations that they're in, having that innate joy, like what brings them joy? And so those were questions I asked, like, what have you used to heal? What brings this smile to your face, and talking to people, it looks like you've never had a day of hardship in your life. How are you showing up this way? And so from those questions and those conversations, I learned, right? I learned there's always one next right step, and to look for the joy and with gratitude in every single moment. And that's healing in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Is that when you asked them, those were the answers you got, or that was kind of like your takeaway? I would love to hear some of the women's answers, when you asked them those questions.
That was definitely some of my takeaways. And, having conversations, I think of this one couple that I spoke to in Europe, and I think we were in the Netherlands at this point, and I was having this conversation about fertility or infertility, and the woman had sitting next to me, just this beautiful couple, where like, we lost a child too. We lost a child too. And so what keeps us together is focusing on each other and the good that we have in our lives. And so, I heard that over and over again. And then knowing, and I remember one of my family members in Palestine who had lost a child had said, the most important thing was gratitude for the, gratitude for the time that we had together, gratitude for the time. So instead of looking at the loss, to look at the positives. And that's the lens. You can look at it both ways. We say the glass half full versus the glass half empty. So looking at the glass half, full, and changing that lens of perspective, and just that ability for me to hear from others who had suffered tragedy, that ability to still look for the joy and be able to celebrate life and to be able to enjoy your life. Like, that was a huge lesson for me. So I think that for me was that, and again, all of that is empowering oxytocin, empowering joy, connection, laughter, all increases oxytocin. So a consistency, while it manifested in different ways, that consistency of oxytocin increasing behaviors really was a new lens that's not taught or learned in medicine.
Yeah. How many doctors do you go to that even bring that up
Yeah.
in our
What are you
society?
doing for
Traditional
fun?
doctors.
How are you playing? What do you enjoy doing? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So when you came back, how did that translate into your time with your patients? Like, I would love to hear some of these initial conversations, right? Because you come back from this trip and you've been in another world.
Yeah.
And I like to call, even if I'm flying home from Dallas, that first day back, it's reentry, right? So I can't even imagine after a trip like that. We've done some longer trips as a family, and it's like it can be very interesting stepping into the new world. So, tell me a little bit about that process. What was that like, bringing these concepts back to the US?
Yeah. So it was just having that conversation, and it's a lot easier to have again when you have the words around it, when you're creating safe space for conversations like this, there's
Mhm.
tremendous amount of healing that happens just in that. Just like, I hear you. It's not in your head. Our physiology affects our behavior. When the soul is suffering, the body suffers. And Aristotle said that. So he said, when the body's physically ailing or suffering, the soul suffers. And when the soul suffers, the body suffers. And like, that concept just rang true for me. So I started looking at those aspects. What's the underlying physiology or energy blockers that could be affecting you? One thing I learned from all over traditional philosophies as part of I traveled, that was consistent, from a Native American shaman, from an Andean philosopher to an Indonesian medicine man, is that in different parts of our body, we hold that trauma. Like, the breast hold relationships, the liver, anger, the pancreas, guilt, the
Mhm.
kidneys, fear. And just thinking of that, when these physical symptoms are manifesting, what's the underlying energy cause of that manifestation too? And I think the next, the real healing medicine comes into energy medicine, understanding that. And again, within our body is the best pharmacy in the world. We're able to make the most healing hormones in the world. And so it's within us to tap into that.
100%. I mean, it really sounds like you're one of the best kind of practitioners and one that's very common in other aspects of the world. You're simply providing space and a channel for women in particular to heal themselves because they know and they have it.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the empowerment piece. I recognized how much in medicine, like when we give that diagnosis, you think, okay, well, diabetes, heart disease, breast cancer, that's it. You live with that label.
Yeah.
And so many other labels we've been given: not smart enough, not pretty enough, not tall enough, not short enough, whatever situations you live with these labels, and those are imprinted on your soul. And it's like, it's time to wash that completely clean. Wash that completely clean. And, we're not our labels, we're not our diagnosis, and that we can heal ourselves from some of the most impactful diagnoses that we've been given. I work with breast cancer patients a lot. And from wherever they are in the world, there's always the question, well, I always ask, what caused the breast cancer? And like, I don't know. My doctor didn't tell me, just did double mastectomy, a chemo, radiation, all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, let's get to the underlying root cause of that. Let's heal the physiology. Let's heal the energy. Let's heal anything that could be pertaining to that. Let's get to those underlying reasons so that becomes a diagnosis of your past. It has nothing to do with your present or your future. So in other words, it's like, graduate high school, you left it and you've moved on, right? Okay, you dealt with your breast cancer, you've left it and you've moved on, versus always waiting for that next shoe to drop, always waiting for the next diagnosis. Or, and that's devastating. That's not how we heal.
Yeah. Are there, any books in relation to that topic that you have recommended for your patients? Like, I know a lot of people love The Body Keeps the Score. I also love that one. It kind of talks about like how trauma and emotions affect our organs and our physiology. If any come to mind, let me know. And I know at the end, we're going to share a ton of resources as well. Hey, we'll get right back to the episode, but I want to share one of my favorite incredible tools with you. I'm all about sharing the tools that help make me feel as good as possible in the easiest way, right? So that's why I'm obsessed with the Sauna Space Glow Light. Our whole family loves it. And it's like having the benefits of morning and evening sunlight without having to step outside, especially when it's just not accessible, whether the weather is too cold or you're stuck at work all day. The red light therapy uses infrared technology to boost your energy, mood, and even your sleep. This is perfect for those days when you can't get outside but still want all the benefits of the natural light. I use this to start my day feeling grounded or to help me and our family wind down at night. It's so simple and easy to incorporate into your routine. If you've been wanting an easy way to bring the power of infrared technology into your life, check the links in the show description for my epic discount on Glow Light by Sauna Space. Now back to the show.
Yeah, I think, again, there's so many that I've read over the years. There's a few books spiritually that have impacted me. One book is The Four Agreements. Oh. The Four Agreements is a powerful book, and it's a good one to write those agreements, put them on your mirror, wherever, but is to look at those four agreements. And another book that really helped me on my journey was The Shack. The Shack, and I think it's called The Shack. It is where a story of a man who lost their daughter in a very devastating way, and then he had an experience with the Trinity, with God, Jesus, and Spirit. And this was because you battle, like, God, why did you give me this? Why are these the cards that I've been dealt? What's the situation? And so that book, The Shack, was really powerful for me too.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. Okay, before we move on to some of the objective measurements, like I said, like the pH strips and, maybe a little ketosis and fasting talk, I would love to know from you as a busy woman, I know you are doing so much, like many of the listeners, how do you fit in the lens? How do you fit in, like, we now know your lens, right? You're looking for gratitude, which is a choice. It's the questions that you choose to ask yourself. And then how do you fit in like the play piece and the joie de vivre in your daily life?
Yeah. And again, it's a discipline and a practice, going from those really dark places. I say the pits of hell and the suicidal ideations and that deep depression, all that stuff, to pull what I did to pull myself out is really well laid out in the Hormone Fix. But it starts with how I start my day. And I think I always say, give me your first 10 minutes of the day. First 10 minutes of the day are for you. And before I even open my eyes, for me, because I need to shift into oxytocin, not cortisol. And as busy as we are getting kids off to school, getting ourselves ready for work, and all our agendas for the day and our busy life, and what the world's rushing, the horrible disinformation in the world, we want to look at, okay, how am I starting my day? And I choose, what enters my mind. So the first thing is I ask myself, where did I see love yesterday? Where did I laugh, or could I have laughed more? And it's usually at myself. And what am I grateful for? So those three questions, love, laughter, and gratitude, are the three questions I start myself. So I focus on that physiology, and that shifts my physiology into a more alkaline state, right off the bat. And that's a more physiologic healing state because oxytocin creates alkalinity, cortisol creates acidity. So we want to redirect and constantly for the play piece, it's like, okay, how can I have a say oxy-play snack or microdose oxytocin throughout the day? And that's like, okay, what's going to make me laugh? What am I reading that nurtures my soul or brings a smile to my face? Who am I connecting with that brings a smile to my face? And it's part of in my programs and I write about it in the Hormone Fix, but in my programs, I have a checklist, and one is using a cheer word throughout the day, a word that brings a smile to your face, that makes you laugh, and to be able to like say, okay, every stop sign, every time I drink a sip of water or whatever it is, I'm going to think of this word that brings a smile to my face. These thoughts create physiology. So let's work on it to our advantage. Let's create those healing hormones. And then, who did you connect with? Like connecting with for nourishing your relationships feeds your soul, and that's an oxytocin behavior. Where did you play today? And so just asking yourself that and incorporating inside. So for me, it's getting outside in nature, watering my plants, whatever it may be. It's that, okay, where can I play more today? And when I find myself in that slippery slope where I'm not doing my, oxytocin increasing behavior, self-care, playing with my pet, getting out in nature, whatever it may be, doing my gratitude journaling or my prayer and meditation. When I'm in this, when I stop doing those, I head back into that acidic state, that more, then it's a slippery slope. So just constantly, it's a discipline, creating a discipline and prioritizing yourself, prioritizing this playtime for yourself, something that brings a smile to your face and is not soft medicine. There's like the most powerful thing I can do for you is help you increase your oxytocin.
I love that. And it's really neat too, because, you talked about this at the beginning. Like, we all know we need to lower our stress and we need to work on stress management. And that just becomes stressful because you're like, okay, well, how do I get rid of these sources of stress when this is my life? And it's like, okay, that question can sit over here. We're not going to like push it away. It's just going to get a little quieter. And instead, we're going to add in. Let it sit. Don't worry. Just add in these fun questions. And then kind of just like when you're adding in more fats and more protein, all of a sudden you're just getting rid of some of the other food that's not serving you. When we're adding in this beautiful lens of play, before we know it, I would imagine the stress just starts to dissipate.
As you reset your circadian rhythm in that way too. And so when we're doing those things, when we're getting, nourishing our body. So for me, it's what I call my keto green method. So and that's beyond food and nutrition. It's a part of it, but it's these lifestyle activities and the perspective, that glass half full perspective. And sometimes we have to train ourselves or retrain our brain to look at look at the positive, look at the glass half full, look at the present, be in the present moment with gratitude. It's training. It's a discipline like brushing your teeth in the morning. It's just a practice and behavior that you will get better at consistently. And it's letting go of the things that no longer serve you too. So
Yes.
there's so much that you can look at and say, okay, what can I cross off my list that's been weighing me down? And, what are relationships that no longer serve me, or practices or eating patterns that no longer serve me? How can I empower my physiology? Because physiology affects our behavior. So how can I empower my physiology to be more like physiology is willpower. So versus I have to think myself better, it's incorporating the body, the mind, the spirit together to heal, to have better energy, to have more positivity, to have that in the world. And in my group that I have going through with Magic right now, one of the things that, often here, we're so self-critical. And so my statement to my participants is time to lay down the sword of self-criticism and pick up the scepter of self-compassion.
Mm.
It's how we
I
have
have
to.
this whole, I told you, your book is one of those books that I have dog-eared and highlighted. And I just want to read, can I just read to everyone an excerpt from this book? Because again, this is all about hormones. And we are going to get into the nitty-gritty keto, fasting, pH. But like, let's just take a look at this section. Self-compassion triggers the release of oxytocin. Like, can we all just have maybe some science-based leverage and pressure to remind us to go easy on ourselves? Like, can we just put some of that out there. So it's not just something we're wearing on t-shirts anymore. It's like this is literally impacting our physiology. And you write a ton about it in here. This was one of my favorite chapters and sections. And magnesium, I want to talk about magnesium too, because you talk about that with oxytocin. Yeah, so important. It's even like when we're looking at half glass full or half empty, we learn to make choices to look at it half full. And I think also everything you're talking about is realizing that we can fill it.
Mm-hmm.
We have
Mm-hmm.
the ability to fill our own.
Yep, to be able to get from an overflowing cup versus, we're squeezing every little bit drop out of ourselves, like wringing a towel sometimes. So
Yeah.
it is to be able to be overflowing. Yeah.
Yeah. And these are strategies every woman can use because they're choices. They take 30 seconds of intention before you even open your eyes. Like these are the real self-compassion, self-love, self-help strategies that actually work in our lives.
Mhm.
All right, so let's talk about alkalinity, if that's okay. Is there anything else you want to bring up from
No,
all the previous topics?
yeah, no, I love it. And the reason I started digging really into alkalinity is one, I knew it in my studies of functional medicine. But then as I was struggling in, reversed, had my daughter at 41, but then at 48, I was in that full blown perimenopause stage. And I'm like, wait, this is, I've got my hormones dialed in. What else is going on? And then I started gaining weight without doing anything different. Anyone listening have experienced that? And that is, that was for me the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. I mean, because I had the brain fog, the memory loss. I feel like I had anger issues and then still dealing with PTSD under the surface at that time. And was in this downward spiral again. I'm like, but the weight gain, that was like, okay, call to action. So that's where I really started getting into carb restriction and ketogenic diets, from using that in my daughter for her seizures to get rid of those seizures, and the neuroprotective effect of keto for brain fog and my patients with neurologic issues too. So we had used that, as well as Candida diet program, which is very low carb, very low glycemic. And so I'm like, okay, cutting out my carbs. And I was getting that, what I called keto crazy. I was getting into ketosis, but I didn't feel good. I was not at home. And at that point, I was a single mom taking care of my girls with a wee one in elementary, a middle schooler, and a high schooler. So it was, very challenging time. And I was like, okay, well, I can't do this. And I checked my urine pH, something I've told my patients to do as I detox. I'm part of my hormone detox. And menopause changes your physiology. And I was like, okay. And as I was feeling this way, I was like, let me check my urine pH. And I was literally as acidic as the pH paper read. So it was, the lowest was 5. I'm like, I have no idea. I was peeing acid basically. And I was like, whoa, that was eye-opening for me. And it made sense because, when you're eating keto, you're not eating your alkalinizing vegetables, you're not eating your fruit, you're not doing those really nourishing meals. And so I was like, okay, well, what do I need to do here? So I added back the alkalinizers. I added bone broth. I added minerals. I added beet greens, sauteed beet greens, lemon water, apple cider vinegar. Doing these things increased my alkalinity. But the thing that increased it the most, I noticed, because I started checking urine pH. And that's why I say check your urine pH, not blood pH. That's a whole nother conversation, but check your urine pH, because that's a biomarker as important as your pulse, as your blood pressure, as your heart rate variability, as the weight on the scale. It's as, if not even more important. And so I noticed those mornings that I did my gratitude journaling before I started my day, or I had a walk on the beach, my urine pH was more alkaline all day. Was
Wow.
more alkaline all day. And so that's when I'm like, okay, what's cortisol doing to urine pH? And cortisol increases hydrogen ion secretion across the renal tubules of the kidney. So that's why we get this acidic urine pH. But oxytocin creates this alkalinity and heals that energy exchange across the cell membrane. So you're more alkaline. That's the power of oxytocin. And if you think about it, I'm an OB-GYN. In pregnancy, the amniotic fluid, when we check amniotic fluid, it is like a pH of 8.5. It's very alkaline. 7 being neutral, greater than 7, the higher the number, the more alkaline, lower than 7, more acidic. So we create life in an alkaline environment. And then again, with studies and many scientific papers looking at urine pH as a biomarker of health, has showed the higher urine pH, the less osteoporosis, the better metabolic system. And so as I did that, as I incorporated the alkalinizers, the nutrition, and the lifestyle factors, the weight just started to fall off. And I felt at home in my body, so much so that where my mornings used to be, like, okay, everyone's late to school. I'm cranky. Let's stop and get coffee on the way to school since we're already late, right? Like, it was this craziness to, like, all of a sudden everyone's up and on time. And I remember when my daughter looked at me and said, "I love you, Mama." And she gave me a kiss and walked out the door. I'm like, what world am I living in? It's that shift of physiology. You go from a repulsive negative state, essentially repelling, to a magnetic positive state. And that you create that for yourself, it emanates into your whole household.
100%, because we are like the center of our family or our community, whoever we're around. As women, we are so powerful energetically.
Yeah,
That's,
absolutely.
this is so beautiful and such a really important conversation. And I love, in part of your book, you literally just simply list all the benefits of going alkaline. And I have measured my urine pH in the past, but never regular. And I love this being one of the regular things we measure, because what we measure, we manage. And this is so incredibly powerful and important. It's so easy. And we're going to link some of your strips here, because I know you've not only got the ability to measure urine pH, but ketones, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I want to geek out on this for a minute, because I've been measuring mine. And I'm doing a lot of play, and I'm also juggling a lot just in growing a business and expanding my team and, all the reality of stress. And so a couple members in my community and I have been measuring our pH, and we were like, oh my gosh, we're really acidic. So now I want to start to play with, because I've been measuring in the morning and sometimes at night, but usually in the morning. I mean, on the inside, at least, I feel a certain way, like, okay, we got to get the kids, and I have like a very loungy morning, red light and all those things. But I think on the insides, I'm not hiding from my physiology.
Right.
So if I say we go out and we do a oxy snack and we play, like, when should we test again to see that effect? Is it instantly a change? Do you
It's
know?
it's pretty instantaneous. And
Okay.
definitely, like, this is what I've learned from my community, because now really implemented over the last 11 years in my online community. And one of the things they'll say, Dr. Anna, I went out, had fun with, my family members, we were laughing, etc. I mean, I didn't eat exactly keto green, but I woke up and I'm really alkaline this morning. It's like, you had fun. One of our clients, she's 67, and this was during the pandemic, and she said, I was so acidic, thinking I'm missing my 2-year-old granddaughter's birthday. And she was very acidic leading into this, and then they did a Zoom video for her birthday, and she celebrated her birthday via Zoom. And she goes, I immediately checked my urine pH and I was alkaline. So that
Oh, so
was just
cool.
like a big aha. And that's where too, like, in I often get really healthy minded eaters, right? Eating lots of greens, even vegetarian, and they'll start checking them. And God, I'm so acidic. It's like that. You can't hide from your internal physiology.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, well, I'm going to geek out on that, and I'll keep my community posted, and we'll keep you posted, and we'll put it on socials. So I'm going to start
Sex helps
testing
wake up.
sex health.
Yeah,
What?
help oxytocin after sex,
Okay,
alkalinity after, yeah, a good
perfect. And
boost
some
of
snuggles with
oxytocin.
snuggles with the kids and community conversations with our people. So that's really fun. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
All right, let's talk a bit about the ketosis and fasting, because you definitely provide an incredible foundation. I'm literally making one of your recipes tomorrow night for my family. You've got recipes, you've got a grocery list. Like, you could not have simplified the process more. And I think I told you, we're now going to dive in after your book to Fast Like a Girl and then Metabolic Freedom. So I feel like your book has been the perfect book to, like, really kick this off. Um, I know a lot of women can be intimidated or maybe a little bit afraid of ketosis or fasting. And so I would love to ask, how do we start to approach this from like an intuitive, in touch with what our body's telling us lens and place?
Yeah, well, one of the first things is because as our reproductive hormones start to decline, or at any stage in our life, and just because of the stress environment we live in and the food environment we live in, this standard American diet, or the processed foods, et cetera, all affect our physiology. So one of the things, as our reproductive hormones start declining, 35 to 55, we lose 75% of our progesterone. Add in some stress to that, that can be a very quick drop, right? A very quick emptying of our buckets. So, but insulin increases. We become more insulin resistant as we age. And cortisol increases as we age. So, like, okay, what can we do to manage to create more insulin sensitivity? And that is with intermittent fasting and no more snacking. And that's why that's part of this program is that physiology and to improve our metabolic health, to improve our brain health, et cetera. But also a study published in 2016 in Journal of American Medical Association, I think in July of that year, looked at women who had had a history of breast cancer and showed that if they fasted at least 12.5 hours between dinner the night before and when they had breakfast or broke fast, they had a significantly reduced risk of breast cancer recurrence. So I'm like, okay, 13 hours, my minimum. So I typically say 13 to 16 hours for women. Sometimes you can do longer, but depends on your physiology. But for hormonal health, having at least 13 to 16 hours helps our metabolic health and helps improve insulin sensitivity. So that's key. Also, during this time, this transition time, our brain's ability, as progesterone and estrogen start to decline, our brain's ability to use glucose for fuel starts to decline. So hence the brain fog, the mood swings, the forgetfulness, the memory issues, things like that we're affected because our brain's actually starving for fuel. And at a physiologic level, your body's like, give me more sugars, give me more carbs, give me more carbs. And that's the opposite of what you want to do. So our brain's ability to use glucose for fuel is hormone dependent, but to use ketones for fuel bypasses that mechanism. Use of ketones for fuel in the brain is not hormone dependent. And if you consider glucose is to gasoline as ketones are to jet fuel. So shifting into that state, at least periodically, gives you this mental clarity, this improved cognition, this improved insulin sensitivity. And the more insulin resistant, the more deficient we become in progesterone, the more insulin sensitive, the better our brain's able to use progesterone too. So there's there's the hormonal connection to these. So this insulin sensitivity is key. And again, we make hormones from fats, right? From healthy fats, we make hormones. So in the 80s, and when I was in college, and the low fat, movement basically destroyed a generation of women's hormones. So adding fat back, it also increases satiety. So you're less hungry. So again, willpower is physiologic. Getting into ketosis also increases satiety, actually creates leptin, one of our other metabolic hormones, creates leptin sensitivity and insulin sensitivity. So with leptin, it's like, okay, I'm more satisfied. I'm less hungry. And so that's a key component of this, especially at any time in our life, but especially in the perimenopause and menopause.
So important. And, I love that you said gasoline versus jet fuel. Like once you get into this ketogenic state or metabolic flexibility, you are running off jet fuel, and it is so self-fulfilling and rewarding. And, I want to ask, how do you bridge the gap between women starting and getting to that place? But really, I would answer that myself, and I would say, get your book, because you really walk women through this process. And it also sounds like you've got a community as well where you support women through. So do you want to talk a little bit about that as we gear up to the Q&A for my private community?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I have what my Girlfriend Doctor Club community. So it's a membership program. I also have my 8-week Magic Menopause program, and I have women 35, and I have an 80-year-old in my program. I love that we are a multi-generational program, mothers and daughters in the program too. I just love that. And so it's my virtual program because in 2014, when I was in that downward cycle and I created this keto green method or keto alkaline method to be more correct. It's really that state of focusing on that alkalinity. And I would tell anyone listening, focus on that pH first before you get into ketosis. Ketosis will naturally make you more acidic, but as you bump up that alkalinity, that combination of getting into ketosis and an alkaline urine pH is like magic. It really is. I call it energized enlightenment. It really does open up our channels, our energetic channels, our flow state a lot more. And from that state, we're like basically, you're hardly able to put two sentences together, let alone write a email. I've now written 3 books, have, hundreds of thousands of people in my online world, in my online space, and being able to help them, because I couldn't have done it if I didn't figure this out. And that's with the grace of God.
Love it. Well, you're living in alignment. I mean, something magical happens. I don't know if that's why you named your community Magic, but when we're giving the body the environment that it's intended to live in, you do get in a flow state. You channel, you're led through source, God, whatever everyone wants to call it. You tap into some infinite resource. And I can tell in the way you're nodding, like you're affirming that. You feel that,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yes,
a real
absolutely.
thing. Yeah.
Yep, it
Yeah.
is. And it's a to get into that physiologic state of being at home in your body, to being happy and content, to being the peace that surpasses all understanding. I like to say the eye of the storm, or the ocean, not the waves. Like we are the ocean, we're not being thrown by the waves. And that makes that's a difference. And that's what I saw as I traveled around the world. People living in war-torn areas of the world, how they show up with joy, like the practices that traditional societies have incorporated to create thousands of years of legacy, right? It's that community. It's celebrating birthdays, celebrating weddings, celebrating each other, celebrating name days, whatever it may be. You're coming together to celebrate. Marriages. It's a week-long celebration, right? It's these really big Sunday dinners, and everyone's invited. This type of thing. It's just that community, those oxytocin increasing behaviors that create this glue that keeps us in a state of joy and healthy relationships at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it's so beautiful. I'm so glad you highlighted that, because I think in busy times in our lives, that can feel like one more thing on the calendar that we can't get to. Yet immersing in those things, what I'm hearing from you is going to give us exactly what we need to be the version of who we need to be to do everything else that we need to do in a different state.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Love it. Well, first of all, let me just wrap by asking, where can people find you? We will link it all below, but can you mention it as well?
Yeah, so easy. My website is dranna.com. So DRANNA.com. So find me there on social media at The Girlfriend Doctor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cabeca. I have so enjoyed this conversation. And now we are going to end this recording and hop into our private community where they will get to ask their private questions of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.